Good morning. We're covering a significant development in New York, where Nicolás Maduro, the former Venezuelan president, faced his second court hearing. This extraordinary process raises fundamental questions about the fairness of justice, especially given the circumstances surrounding his capture. More than 11 weeks ago, U.S. Delta Force soldiers captured Maduro in a secret operation in Venezuela, transporting him to the United States. Following this, U.S. President Donald Trump declared that the United States would temporarily assume control over Venezuela. Currently, Maduro's former deputy, Delcy RodrA-guez, is leading the nation with the permission of U.S. President Trump. Maduro stands accused of a combination of drug and weapons offenses, allegedly involving various terror groups. A conviction could lead to a lengthy, possibly lifelong, prison sentence. However, the true complexity of this trial extends far beyond the specific charges, revolving instead around the core question of whether this process can truly be considered a fair, rule of law procedure, given his forceful removal and abduction. Inside courtroom 26A, Nicolás Maduro appeared surprisingly composed. He entered with a smile, greeting his lawyers and nodding to the audience, a stark contrast to his detention, where he has spent most of the past 11 weeks in isolation in a Brooklyn prison. Contact is limited to 15-minute phone calls with family and discussions with his legal team. On this day, neither Maduro nor his wife, Celia Flores, who sat 3 seats to his right, addressed the court. Both wore khaki-colored prisoner uniforms, their quiet demeanor reflecting the formal atmosphere of the proceedings. The 70-minute hearing, overseen by 92-year-old Judge Alvin Hellerstein, centered not on guilt or innocence, but on a more procedural yet critical matter: who will pay for Maduro's legal defense? The Venezuelan state had agreed to cover the costs despite Maduro's disempowerment. However, the United States government, which must authorize such payments, has withheld approval. Prosecutor Kyle Wirschba argued that the financing is a matter of national security and foreign policy, citing ongoing United States sanctions against Venezuela. Judge Hellerstein repeatedly questioned this stance, pointing out that the situation in Venezuela had been changed or corrected, and that the United States continues to conduct business with the nation. Prosecutor Wirschba, however, repeatedly avoided a direct answer. Barry Pollack, Maduro's defense attorney and once Julian Assange's lawyer, countered that a fair trial is impossible without adequate funding. He even suggested that without the Venezuelan government's financial support, the defense might have to withdraw, recommending the court dismiss the case entirely. Maduro, wearing headphones for a Spanish translation and reading glasses, took extensive notes, occasionally exchanging words with his lawyers, maintaining a largely emotionless facade during these exchanges. Outside the Federal District Court in Lower Manhattan, the atmosphere was dramatically different. Hours before Maduro's appearance, 2 opposing groups of demonstrators gathered, separated by police barricades barely a meter apart. While both sides prominently displayed the Venezuelan flag, their sentiments clashed violently. One group vehemently welcomed Maduro's arrest, while the other loudly demanded his release. Tom Burke, a peace activist and unionist from Michigan, traveled to New York specifically to advocate for Maduro's freedom. He condemned President Trump's administration, stating, "Trump has no right to kidnap a president." Burke, wearing a red cap inscribed, "No to war, yes to peace," identified with a communist sister party to Maduro's political organization, the PSUV. He emphasized Maduro's democratic legitimacy in Venezuela, citing multiple re-elections, though he omitted any mention of the accusations of electoral fraud by the European Union and the United States, or the United Nations allegations of torture and executions against Maduro. Burke tied Maduro's situation to broader issues like the unpopularity of the so-called Iran war and a general rejection of the United States war machine. On the other side, Wilmer Contreras, a Venezuelan living in New York, described Maduro as a criminal, drug dealer, and dictator. Wrapped in his homeland's flag, Contreras explained that protesting in Venezuela against the leadership was too dangerous, making his presence in New York essential. He expressed deep incomprehension toward the pro-Maduro demonstrators, suggesting their protest was primarily against President Trump rather than genuinely for Maduro. While acknowledging that Maduro's removal hadn't yet improved conditions for Venezuela's poorest, Contreras firmly believed the action was justified. As the demonstrators continued their heated exchanges, the hearing upstairs concluded. Judge Hellerstein decided to postpone the decision on who would pay Maduro's defense. However, he deemed it disproportionate to dismiss the case over this financial question. No date was set for a subsequent hearing. As the courtroom rose around 12:50 in the afternoon, Nicolás Maduro, still with a faint smile, disappeared behind the large wooden door. What's your take on Maduro in U.S. court? Justice questioned, funding standoff. Share your view in the comments. Do you think this will matter in the next news cycle? This video was generated using artificial intelligence.